Today's guest on Uncharted Your Sidekick for Life is Matt McDonnell, serial entrepreneur, sailor, real estate developer, venture capitalist, and curious soul with a talent for reinventing himself. In this episode, Matt takes us on a journey that spans sailboats, law school, startups, and everything in between. He's someone who didn't follow a map, he built one. From a duffel bag lifestyle on the sea to launching ventures and navigating VC, Matt shares the real story behind what it means to build a career around curiosity, not convention. We talk about how to figure out who you are when the world keeps telling you who to be, what it means to follow your gut, especially when it takes you off the beaten path, and how mentorship, coaching, and staying relentlessly curious can shape a life full of pivots and breakthroughs. If you're at a crossroads or tired of trying to figure it all out, this episode will remind you that the exploration is the path. You don't need to know the final destination. Just start sailing.
Alrighty, well, welcome to Family Ups Uncharted, your sidekick for life. And I am excited to be with everyone again today. It's been a week since we were last together. And having Matt on the show, we've known each other. We worked together for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
And doing podcasts and all kinds of crazy stuff. So I'm excited to share your story with the audience. And before we get there, just as a formal quick introduction, because the audience should know us by now, but you want to kick it off, Gloria?
Sure. My name is Gloria Park. So I traditionally work in wealth management, but I like to say that I enjoy helping people achieve what they really want and focus on working with entrepreneurs. I'm also working on a book that is just it's just an ongoing project. And the book is really about creating a roadmap for aspiring and established entrepreneurs. So some of you may already know that this current rising generation will have the most newest entrepreneurs than any previous generation. So more than ever, I think it's so necessary to have some sort of resource.
More resources, yeah.
Yeah, resources to really educate them.
Yeah. And then
Great. Hey, I'm Natalie Payton Newman, still getting used to that last name.
Starting to make it roll.
Yeah, exactly. I'm an actor, comedian, and podcast personality.
Like it.
And I'm here to heal through humor.
Love it. And Dan Dillard as host of the show. And we have a guest and friend here. Let you...
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, so Matt McDonnell, I'm at this point, serial entrepreneur, dad, curious fellow. I'm also working on a book, which we can talk about in a little bit, but mostly real estate development and venture capital is the two industries that I spend most of my time in.
Yeah, I love it. We got you in the show today just because as we've worked together, I'm just fascinated by your life, and also because it's so aligned with the work that you are doing with your book and the podcast that we did together, Navigating Complexity, talking about the complexities of life and how you navigate through those things. Our show, Uncharted, also Sidekick for Life, is got some similar themes to it. It's designed for Gen Z and designed for those that are kind of figuring out life at the moment, at the starting point, like how do you get to that next level? And the show as your sidekick, and of course, finding up building the sidekicks as well. And we'll get into that in later shows, but all about how do you figure out who you are inside, and then how do you navigate that? And it's sometimes it's complex. And then but as soon as you find that way, you start seeing that path open up. So, really excited to have and share your story. And I want to start with taking you back to when you were a young lad.
Yeah.
What'd you want to be?
A while ago.
When you were like 16.
You know, it's so funny. I was had this conversation not too long ago with somebody, and I've never had any real idea of what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I also have never had a job that I knew existed the day I graduated high school.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, so it's just sort of so I've sort of been like groping around for the get-go, but I knew some things I didn't want, right? I didn't
Yeah.
want to wear a suit. I didn't want a sort of traditional 9 to 5 job where I was selling my hours. I knew I wanted to spend time outside. So I sort of had these like things that were important to me that I knew if I compromised on, it wouldn't be sustainable. But I didn't have like a, here's what I want to be when I grow up ever. I still don't. I think the closest I ever came is for a while, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. And then when I went to law school, I found out that I was dead wrong. But yeah.
That's great.
The image that came to my mind whenever you're talking about that is the image of that half sculpture like being chiseled out.
Yeah.
It's like this, just as important. You may not know what you want to be, and that will change. That story will change. But if you start knowing what you don't want to be, like I don't want to wear a suit.
Yeah.
Boom. That's okay.
I want time freedom.
That starts narrowing down who you are just by. So that's really cool that at least you started going down. That's great advice, for sure.
Yeah, well, and I also felt like there were other things that I could say, right? Even if it wasn't what I didn't want. Like I knew that when I get curious about something, I go in, right? And it's not it doesn't feel like an active decision to me. It's like, this is just something that I'm engaged with right now and I want to spend a lot of time learning about. And so I think knowing that I was always going to be that way, and it was, I was not cut out necessarily for a vocation that was not going to change very much. Like I was never going to be a vet, right? Or some of those things that I think have a day-to-day structure. Yeah, the patients are different, but you go to the same office,
Right.
you're providing care in a certain way. I always knew that wouldn't work, and I always knew that I would change, right? And so I think when you think about being a serial entrepreneur, the thing that really frees you up to do is to change, right? And to evolve. And I knew that was important, even if I couldn't, there's no way I could have articulated any of this when I was 16, right? But
Sure.
but I knew that was the case at some sort of deep level, that I wasn't just going to pick one thing and do it.
Well, and that the question that comes to mind is I don't know if I've ever asked you this, but what was your childhood like your parents, like what kind of things, values, or what things did they instill in you? Because there's wondery, what I'm hearing still to this day.
Yeah.
Right? There's wondery that guides your life, which is awesome. I love that. But I feel like that always starts with the home and allowing that to be okay, right?
Yeah. I mean, my parents are wonderful. So I grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, in a very Irish Catholic kind of a town. He played basketball in the church leagues, but the church is sort of the center of life for everybody. And my parents, I think, recognized pretty early on that I was not going to be a traditional student. And so instead of trying to force me in a box. And so my dad is a disabled construction worker. My mom was a nurse. She went to college when I was a young kid. And so I kind of had this experience growing up where I saw how quickly life could change. My dad was in a bad car accident when I was 6. And so it just really drove home the point, right? That it was the here and now and the present was what really mattered.
Wow.
Right. And so I think,
that's important. I mean, I don't know that I knew that nugget about you. And think about that at 6 years old, seeing that, hey, life changes and you've got to be able to adapt. So what that does to your ability to be present.
Yeah. And, and it was funny, right? Because then he had to stop working. And then, after a certain point, and then he tried a bunch of different things. He became a realtor for a little while. And the physical problems kept mounting. He was in a lawsuit that my parents eventually had, ended up settling as a result of that accident. But it also kind of drove home the point that I had this really good home life. My grandmother lived with me, my mom's mom. She was a nurse. And so I kind of grew up in this environment where everybody played a role, and it was pretty unspoken, right? But my grandmother worked the 3 to 11 shift as a nurse. My mom was at work 9 to 5, right? And then my dad was, doing what he could for those periods of time. And I think it also kind of took a lot of the stress around finances out of me, because we had sort of had like a normal, Northeastern Pennsylvania blue collar existence. And then it got a lot harder. And then it got a little bit better. Right. And then I went to college. And so it was sort of, I kind of experienced this spectrum as a kid of, well, you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
Right?
Things will ebb and flow, but it'll all work out.
Took a lot of the fear out of it, I think, for me, which was nice. And then, I think my parents were they knew from the get-go that I was a curious kid. I was a voracious reader. And so they supported me without telling me what to do, right? It was sort of like my parents had this rule, and I have it with my kids, that if I expressed an interest in a book, like it was on my dresser the next day. They would just go to the bookstore and get it, and I always read them. There were no unread books. And something like that with my kids too, where, it's sort of trying to inculcate that habit of curiosity and, being a little bit of an autodidact is way easier now that you have YouTube and online courses and things like that. But yeah, I've always been that way. And I think that that's one of those other kind of core skills that you use all the time. Like, what do you do when you don't know what to do? You go learn, right? And I think that was very much kind of a part of my household environment growing up.
Well, Gloria, and I know that you're in finance, and I love the aspect that there is this fear. Everyone, well, I don't know that everyone, but that a lot of America has a fear of like, how am I going to make ends meet? So a lot of decision making toward who you're going to be often, and I know it's been seen at the office with clients and stuff, often, even though you have this, what's calling you in your heart, but is that going to pay the bills? Well, no, maybe becoming a CPA will, so I'm going to go do this. And so you find that a lot of times people make decisions based on that, on a money, fear of money thing.
Yeah.
And so what's really cool about your story is that you were able to see both sides of it at a young age and be able to accept, as you mentioned, the ebbs and flows, and that fear of money became a less of an issue for you. So it gave you this freedom to like just chase your curiosity, which is wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And it's like that stoic idea too, right? If you sleep on a wooden floor and don't have a lot of stuff, right, then you are also less afraid of those sorts of things. And right after high school, during high school, I got really interested in sailing, which sort of occupied the next decade and a half of my life. But I lived out of a duffel bag for a long time, right? And I think that, like still to this day, if I get stressed out, I'm like, I always just go live on a sailboat, right? And like, and I don't need a lot of stuff. And it's not that I actually want to go do that. I mean, I do sometimes, but, not full time. And I think that's pretty confidence inspiring, right? That like, hey, I'm going to be okay no matter what.
Because you can be self-sufficient.
What led to that decision? I'm just curious.
It's like love at first sight. Like I was a Boy Scout, I'm an Eagle Scout. And I just love spending time outside. And I also have this like very sort of strong bent towards autonomy and freedom. And so going camping in the woods with my buddies was something that all of our parents were willing to let us do from a relatively young age. And so that was like, we would get in the car and we'd have an older sibling or a parent or somebody drive us to the Adirondacks, which is about 4 hours away in upstate New York. They'd drop us off. We'd go backpacking for 4 or 5 days, and then they'd be there at the end. And sometimes the parents came, sometimes they didn't. But getting that sort of level of freedom and being really comfortable in that environment was sort of step one. And then from those programs, I did a week-long sailing trip in the Florida Keys. It's a program called Sea Base. So you go to Isla Mirada, which is the first big key south of Miami. And we got on a sailboat. So it was me and 6 of my buddies and 2 dads and then the boat captain. And we sailed to Key West and back over the course of that week. And it was just, I was in. That was the only thing that needed to happen. And so then I came home and I, started taking a small boat merit badge class and, really trying to kind of hone that craft. But I mean, it was love at first sight. And it was like all of the things that I liked, right? You get to be outside, you get to be around people you like. It's a dynamic environment. There's, you could spend 1,000 years sailing and there's still going to be more to learn. And so it was just this kind of like very rich, lifelong opportunity that I just fell into right away.
And so you did that for 10 years. So it turned into work, income for you.
Yeah, so not much. But I think my first deckhand job, it was just room and board. And then the next one, I got paid $500 a month plus room and board. So it was
rolling in it.
Yeah, right. It was something, but it was, yeah, I mean, so I went to college, started doing an outdoor education program, and found some people that I think for the first time, really, I wasn't around a lot of people at home that I was like, that's who I want to be like when I grow up. And then when I went and I found some of these folks that were working in outdoor education, and they were, they went to great colleges, they, were good at many other things, but they opted into this kind of lifestyle, right, where they were able to spend a lot of time outside and do the sports and activities that they loved. And I was a super active kid, was not good, still not, at sitting in my seat. And so that was a really nice opportunity to sort of find those people. And one of those people in particular, she was a sea kayaker, and it was something that I had never done before. I also kind of realized around this point in time that I just like steep learning curves. It doesn't really matter what I'm learning. I love that experience to this day of being
just dive in,
really bad at something. And you can only get rapidly better at something until you become a novice, right? Like you have to be a beginner to have that level of growth. And so it's like, well, sea kayaking is a good thing to learn. I don't know anything about it. And so that turned into my first real outdoor education job, which was, I got hired as I believe the youngest instructor at Hurricane Island Outward Bound. I was way too young to even apply for the role, but I had this person who I'd done a lot of trips with. She was, an instructor there as well, and was able to kind of take me under her wing and vouch for me. And that allowed me to get that job. And then they canceled the sea kayaking program after the first year. And so that was when sailing kind of came roaring back into my life, because that's really what that organization was doing as a, course type. And so it was, well, you either don't have the best job you've ever had, or you become credentialed in the way that you need to be to sail in a hurry. And so I chose that path. And then, I was in college at the time, so I did a semester on a sailboat with Sea Education Association, which is a scientific research vessel. They have two of them now, but I sailed on one and, went for a semester on the boat, and also doing science and other nautical science coursework in Woods Hole, Massachusetts. And so I kind of got like the book learning part of it there, and then it was just jobs after that. Or really, I sometimes joke that it was just falling in love with a series of different boats. It's like, okay, I'm going to go work on that one now. I'm going to go work on this one.
Your own below deck series.
That's right. Yeah. It's funny. I don't watch that show, but I've caught enough of it to know that it's pretty accurate.
Yeah. Including the societal recreation of relationships and stuff like that. That's great.
Yeah. I mean, it's, like there'd be, boat weddings all the time. Like people would frequently find their life partner there.
Their mate.
Yeah. Their mate. Yeah, that's right.
Put them in an enclosed space and see what happens.
Exactly.
That's right. Yeah. And you kind of have to learn to deal with your problems in those environments, right? Like you can't, when you're out in the middle of the ocean, you've got, if you're on a 140-foot boat, there's a real limit to how far away you can get from someone. And so you just can't hide.
Yeah.
Really cool. It's always been a fascinating, I've heard this a couple of times from you, and I always get different nuggets from you. It's just a fascinating start to life. And when I say start, I mean, obviously, in your 20s, right? You're getting this different than what I think most people do. I know most people do.
And were you ever worried, like, okay, after this, then I'll really, get serious about work? Or were you just like, I'm learning, I'm coasting, I'm doing my thing?
Yeah. I mean, I was dead serious about sailing. Yeah. Right? Like it was, I have a Coast Guard license. Wow. So it was a lot of work and effort. I think you needed at that time, don't quote me on this, but around 1,000 days on a boat to just be able to apply. And there's a lot of coursework and a lot of testing. And, it's like any other kind of government driven thing. You have to be in a drug testing program for a long time. So you really kind of have to orient your life around it. And so it was a real focus. But at some point, it started to become clear to me that the career path there was actually like the longer you stuck around and the better you were at your job, the more likely you were to get stuck behind a desk and become an executive director of a nonprofit. Which for a while I thought, it was like I entertained the idea, but I think for a couple of reasons it just became clear to me that that wasn't what I wanted to do. And so I remember very vividly the moment where I was like, I need to do something else. And it was a shoulder season. I was working on an island off the coast of Maine after Outward Bound summer programming ended. And before I was going to do something else. And it coincided with the great financial crisis. And so I'm listening on NPR to the story, I think it was a Saturday morning, where Lehman's, now going out of business. There's this huge crisis. I'd been out of college a couple of years, and I was like, oh my God, all of my classmates went to work on Wall Street and they're making these decisions, and I don't understand this world at all. And so that was the moment where I felt like
steep curve that you're looking for.
Yeah, right. And it was like, well, what? And like, I'm pretty good at math. Like, why don't I know finance like these people? And so that was sort of the kernel for me, where it was like, maybe accidentally kind of opted out of society a little bit, which wasn't ever an intentional choice, but it was sort of like, well, I know these people and I know I'm, at least as capable as these folks are. And so it was a real galvanizing experience for me. I mean, truly, like I was literally shoveling dead seagulls that morning. Like my job was to walk around the island that morning. The caretaker gave it to me and I'm like picking them up with shovels and throwing them in the water for crabs to eat them. And I was like, what am I doing with my life?
I don't even know what's happening out in the crisis.
Well, and again, back to what you said earlier, you didn't know exactly what you wanted, but you know what you didn't want, right? I don't want to be behind a desk, government job. This is where this is going. I don't see that path for me. So I've got to look elsewhere. And that curiosity was there again.
Yeah.
So you saw something and you're like, now I'm curious. Back to being a kid, and like every time you had a curious, there was a book there. So you had that permission to be like, all right, not permission, but just freedom to be like, that's what I want to learn.
Yeah.
So then that next part of the story, you make a shift, I guess. You go from that to what? What's next?
Yeah, well, so it took a while, right? So you have this realization, but I'm still on an island with this 65-year-old caretaker that I barely know and nobody else around, right? And so I had to finish that job up, and then I got on a boat. So I went to Newport, Rhode Island, and I got on a boat called the Spirit of Massachusetts, which is now a lobster restaurant in southern Maine.
Oh, wow.
That's cool.
Boat's no longer operational.
So if we ever go to and have
I think
lobster,
it's in Kittery. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, like, Matt,
you look
used
it
to
up.
work on this job.
Yeah.
That's right. And I did a shipyard with a friend, a couple friends of mine, and the idea was to get the boat ready to go sail, bring it south for the winter, and then I was going to go do an Outward Bound semester that winter for students who were doing a gap year. And so, worked on the boat. We delivered it to Charleston, South Carolina, and when we got into Charleston, I went to the library, which is how you checked your email at the time, and I went to the library and I checked my email. And I had a letter from my boss at Outward Bound that said, hey, this course has been under-enrolled, and so we're looking for 2 people. There were 4 of us that were instructors to sign up to not teach the course, but it's so close to that time that we'll pay you. We have to pay you for, you blocking off, this 9-month chunk of your life. And so I immediately volunteered.
Nice. I volunteered not to do the work and get paid.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And I was, I was like,
it's like stay an extra night, get $500 credit on the airline, go for it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And it was like, I was pretty poor at the time and didn't have health care. And, I'm like climbing a loft on these boats, like doing dangerous stuff and not with medical care around. And so it was, I guess in hindsight, it looks like you're growing up a little bit. But I think for me at the time, it was like, this is a good opportunity to save a little bit of money. Charleston's a beautiful place. I had never been there before. And I was just kind of curious, right? Like, this is like, I'm from Pennsylvania. It was at the time a very blue, union driven state, and Charleston is like the, hotbed where the Civil War started. And like, I was just curious. I wanted to be around people that were different than I was. And I really loved the city. And I found a boat that had just been built and they didn't really know how to monetize it. And so I had been selling these programs at Outward Bound from time to time and delivering them. And so I sort of knew what you needed to deliver on. And so I kind of raised my hand, and this is really the start of my entrepreneurial journey, and said, hey, I know how to get people on boats. I know what the program needs to be. And it wasn't purely a science research vessel. So there was kind of this white space in the sail training industry for really more character development and leadership development programs that were not just about, taking samples of seawater and, what various research projects that were also really fun. So I basically became like a serial entrepreneur in this nonprofit that had built this boat. Did a lot of really cool stuff. We did a human ecology program where you sail next to Hispaniola, which is the island where Haiti and the Dominican Republic are. You can literally see the border from the water because there's no trees on the Haiti side. Oh, wow. And so then you start peeling back, well, what's the human history? Why has this happened? And so these like very visceral, like valuable learning experiences that you really can't get unless you get off the couch and go to these places. Right. So anyway, I had just a great time doing it. And then I kind of ran into the same sort of thing where it was, well, I know where this goes, right? It's into this person's seat who's my boss. And I don't really want to do that. And, I'd been in Charleston for 4 years and it's a small town. And I started to feel like there were things that I could do better than, other people in the organization. And so it was sort of that like same old entrepreneurial bug where it was like, all right, well, this is a valuable experience, but I want to go do something else. And I want to be in the rooms where the power players are, right? And I was sort of, as a broke sailor, you're not really allowed in those rooms. And so that was what sort of planted the seed for me to go to law school. One of my other curiosity habits had led me to, I joke, I double majored in philosophy in college, where I took twice as many courses as I needed for that major. And I was just fascinated by it. And at the same time, the math teaching in I went to public school from elementary straight through, and I kind of left with like a little bit of a complex about my own ability to do math. Did not like the classes. It was boring. It wasn't, grounded in real problems that you had to solve. And so without that application, it just never clicked for me. And so I decided to take a chance and join the first class of an accelerated MBA program that had just launched at the College of Charleston. So it was a 15-month program. It had a couple international study experiences, which was also important to me. And it was the exact right amount of time for me to go to apply to law school, which at the time was still, what I thought I wanted to do when I would grow up. But I wanted to build some confidence and a real skill set around finance, which started with that, hey, why am I not in the arena with these people? Well, I heard about the great financial crisis breaking on Maine public radio.
Yeah.
What I've heard a couple times is that you knew you didn't want to, well, I'm putting words in your mouth, but you didn't really want to take advice from people whose lives you didn't want to emulate.
Yeah.
But on the flip, what you actually said is like, I saw people who had these lives that I wanted, and I wanted to go after it the way they did. So that's really cool. You knew that about yourself.
Yeah. And I think I knew, and still to this day, I think the fastest way to learn anything is to go learn it from somebody who's done it before. And so that was always kind of a driving goal. Yeah. And it was like, well, if this person knows how to do that, and you find over time that it maybe takes you less time to learn what you want to learn from one person than, than somebody else. Like they may have developed a skill set that it's going to take you 10 or 15 years to start to develop on your own. Right. And so it was all, there's no like neat and easy, like you need 6 months with this person. It's, it was a lot messier than that.
Yeah.
So that's a nice segue into, because I hear a lot of these decisions being made and wonderful experiences, but obviously along the way you've talked about, friends being on the boats with you. You've talked about, dads going on these trips with you and so how has mentorship shaped your life during that time?
Yeah. Well, I think a couple ways. So I think there's a few different kinds of mentors, right? Which we've sort of talked about. Like there's there's people that you can learn a discrete thing from. There's people that you can learn how to be as opposed to how to do. And I have always found that how to be people to be the best mentors for me, because I think that's what I've struggled with. Like I've, being, doing something difficult and being able to be comfortable in your own skin doing that thing, being able to have confidence in your own skill set, right? Being able to, be comfortable with how long it takes to achieve a goal, right? Like those are always the things that I have found, I and other people that I know have found more challenging than like, how do I learn how to do X, Y, or Z, right? Tie this knot on a sailboat.
Right.
And so those were the mentors that I always gravitated towards. And one of the things I noticed about a lot of those people is that they tended to come from wealthy backgrounds. And when I went to Colgate University, one of the other sort of huge events in my life is that the year that I went to school, they did an experiment where they provided need-blind admissions for the first time ever. They still can't afford, most schools can't afford to do this still, but it was a defined experiment. And so as I was getting rejected from all these other schools, I got into this fancy liberal arts school that was like the exact right place for me at the exact right time. And it totally changed my life because it put me around a totally different group of people than I otherwise had access to. And so I think for me, what I always thought was interesting was that these folks had context, right, from being around the dinner table. And so for me, the mentorship became, and there are a variety of different examples, but this woman, her name's Abby, who got me into sea kayaking and then ultimately into working at Outward Bound. She grew up in Manhattan, right? Like couldn't have been more, dad commuting in a helicopter, like couldn't have been more different from me and my childhood. But we just clicked, right? And it was, and so I think for me, when I think about the mentors that really were the most important, they often tended to be the most different for me. And that was also true when I went to South Carolina. Like I learned a lot more from like John Q, South Carolina lifelong resident, than I would from some fancy person with a fancy resume in a place that I already understood and knew well. So I think that was, there's lots of specific mentors, but I think what I was always looking for were the people that sort of showed me, were very different from me and showed me a completely different way of thinking that I didn't know existed, right? It was never easy to say like, this is the thing I want to get better at, and so I'm going to go find a mentor. It was like, no, I click with this person. They're fascinating, they're inspiring, and they're totally different from me.
I love that aspect. I think it's the first in 4 seasons, the first time that I think about mentorship led by curiosity, where it's more like, it's more than just like, I want to be this, who do I find? It's like, I like this person and I'm curious about them.
Yeah, why do I like them?
And then that itself turns into some sort of learning experience. And really love that aspect. And going into learning from people that are completely different. I think the one nugget I pull from that that's important to share is that you never know. I mean, everybody's the same, and they just got different environments, and they come up differently. But there's that kindness, and sometimes I feel like it could be thought of. You could have an image in your head of like, these people are this way, without actually knowing them. But then getting to know them, they're like, there's really kind people that kind of show you different paths, and that's the nugget I extracted from the story that part of the story, and I think it was wonderful. A question I have, and again, thinking from the audience perspective, is, was there any fear to know people that weren't like you? Because it's coming out of your shell and like, here's who I grew up with, and now I'm gonna go be with all these people that are not like me. Was there any fear that you had to overcome, or how did you approach that?
It's a good question. I mean, there were definitely like feelings of inadequacy at times. You like are hanging out with people over lunch who just have like a wildly different level of personal wealth that they're coming from, right? Or something like that. So, I mean, there were definitely, I was aware. But But I also think that when you're a college student, it doesn't matter, right? Because that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about the band you're going to go see that weekend that you like, or in our case, like, where are we going to go climbing this weekend, or where are we going to go backpacking, or, whatever. And so, you'd be aware that there were differences, but I wouldn't say it was fear, right? It really was, for me, curiosity. And then I would have these experiences. Like, I have a dear friend still, her family they have a giant house in Connecticut, and they used to do this Christmas party when I was in college. And so we'd go to their house and we'd meet CEOs of all these different businesses that their family knew. And, it wasn't like a fear-based thing. It was like, oh, all I need to do is just be here, right? Like, I'm immediately accepted, because the assumption or presumption is always, well, if you're here, you belong, right? And so I think that was the thing that kind of allowed me to get over that, any potential fear. And then, where I would feel it a little bit is in places where I wasn't good at stuff, right? Like, back to the finance, and, it was like, oh, I had this idea that I wasn't that good at math, and that, turned out to be dead wrong. But that's where you'd have the fear. And then the only way you get over fear is to just go face it. Yeah, tackle it.
That's really cool. Really fascinating. All right. So let's back to your story. I just wanted to extract the nuggets. So you are now going to your MBA, you're going to MBA, and then you decide to go to law school, or no?
Yeah. So I decided to go to law school. So I applied and got into law schools while I was doing my MBA program. I do not recommend doing those two things sequentially. I finished my MBA, and then I had 3 days before law school started
Oh, my
for
word.
orientation. So I packed up. At the time, my now wife and I, and our big yellow lab, we loaded up a Honda Fit, and we drove from Charleston to Austin. I had mono, which I found out after we got here. So it was like a little bit of a rocky transition to Austin. But yeah, and then I just immediately was like, my God, I do not want to do this for a living. And it was...
How long did it take you to figure that out?
I mean, maybe the first day.
Wow.
I mean, it was so fast, and it was born of ignorance, right? Like, this is actually pretty funny. I went and I talked to the folks at the MBA program, and I was like, hey, do you know anybody who is a lawyer that I can talk to about what that's like? I'm thinking about going to law school. And so, I got introduced to all these interesting people, but they're like 70-year-old judges in like a 400-year-old building in Charleston, right? So like, they're talking about what they do day to day in a way that was not going to be available to anybody as a recent law school grad. And so I just didn't really know what lawyers did all day. I knew that a background in philosophy was useful. I was pretty good at writing, always have been argumentative. And so it's like, oh, well, this is the right path for me. But it turns out that you just do a lot of like really pedantic stuff, at least early in your career. And I was just literally bored out of my mind.
I was going to say, from sailing and not wanting to be a suit and behind a desk to like, that's the job.
Being indoors.
Like
reading
14 hours a day. Yeah. And like, there's this thing called the Blue Book, which is like your punctuation and grammar guide. And so you'd have these blue booking exercises, and it's like, I'm sitting here for 5 hours and I'm getting bad grades because I don't have 2 spaces after the period in this reference. So there was just a lot of like conflict early on between me. And I was also a little bit older, right? So I was in my late 20s when I went to law school. And so I didn't have any of that like 22-year-old, like, oh, I'm really impressed by this faculty person, which has always been a shortcoming of mine. I'm still that way, but I was always like, man, I'm not jumping through the hoop just to make this person happy. Like, this is a waste of my time. And so I pretty quickly realized that I needed to either leave, which probably took me like 2 full weeks to realize I either needed to leave or I needed to make it my own experience, because otherwise, if I just tried to play the game, everybody was going to beat me, because they were way more committed and way more interested and way more curious about the stuff that we were learning, and that it just wasn't ultimately going to be very successful for me, right? Not just in a competitive way.
So even though even though you knew you didn't like it the first day, and it took you 2 weeks to figure out that I've got to figure this out, did you complete it?
I did.
How long did that take?
4.5 years.
Wow,
maybe 5.
That's commitment.
Yeah, it took a long time, and what I chose was to make it my own, which, in hindsight, I'd kind of been doing this all along. But I went and I did a program called 3-Day Startup. Unfortunately the pandemic killed it, but just a great program. It's here in Austin, and it was a bunch of grad school students from all over UT. So it was, there were people in the petroleum engineering department, which until I did that program, did not know that petroleum engineering was something you could study, right? And so I got to meet all these interesting people. And the idea was you come together over a weekend, you build a startup in 3 days, and then you're pitching to real investors at the end. And whether or not the startup goes well is, totally irrelevant in my mind. It was the experience of understanding what it really took to go from zero to here's an MVP. And I just loved it. And so after that experience was over, and, this startup that I worked on didn't win. It wasn't my idea. But
or it would have.
And
won.
that's why it didn't win.
That's not what I said. But I left that program and I got an email, and it was, hey, there's this company that came out at 3-Day Startup a couple of years ago, and they're looking for an intern. Is anybody interested? And so I applied, and I remember I got the job by the end of that first semester. And I started on January 5th that next year. So I came back to campus early. I'd gone home to visit my family in Pennsylvania. And it was another one of those inflection points, right? Where there were more mentors and people that I, wanted to learn from, but I basically used that business. It was called Famigo. I used that business as the foil to law school. And so when I needed to do something that had like a real reason to be done, like we need to figure out how to license this content, or we need to figure out how to put together this kind of a contract, then I could sort of line up my course schedule so that I could, do the things I needed to do. And so it took a while, and it's I don't recommend working full time and going to a good law school at the same time. Right. I think that was brutally hard. But it was also really good preparation, right? Like I still continue to do two things all the time. Mm-hmm. And I think that I built that skill set at that point. But it was driven, my desire to keep going through law school, I think, was largely driven by the fact that it was very obvious to me then and still that if you've gone through that training, you just look at the world differently. Mm-hmm. And it's like a lens that you have. And I got one of those lenses in philosophy. I got one of those lenses studying finance in an MBA program. Like, it just changes the way you filter information. And that always struck me as long-term very valuable. And so it wasn't like, should I leave or should I stay? It was more, how should I get through this in a way that is not going to bore me to tears?
Mm-hmm. Right.
I think that's really important, that that last part you said is, how am I going to get through this, without, quitting or, pulling out and making it your own? Because I think now it's very easy to just let things go, especially with, I'm not going to say just this generation, Gen Z, but with anybody, like when it gets hard or when it's not fun anymore, to just quit. Yeah. And so just having that perseverance is a skill. And I think definitely a life skill.
Yeah, especially just the viewpoint of like, you knew at the very beginning you didn't like this, and to stick to it with 5 years, it's almost like, but you changed your perception about it. And I love the interesting part of a lens, because you're like, look, I'm doing this because I know it's important. Like, the world revolves around law. Right. And I know it's important to have this lens. And even though I don't like it and don't believe the dot and the spaces behind the dot and all that kind of stuff, I'm trying to get something else out of this that people may not be doing. And so I thought that was really great insight. Since we are at the bottom part of the podcast, we're reaching a end, I do want to talk about coaching, because you mentioned, you've got first of all, such a fascinating story, and we've heard a fraction of it. But along the way, I've just heard mentors here, and talking to people that are not like you, and diving in and doing deep dives, and having this curious, which is wonderful, this curious journey in your heart always. May not ever know who you are, but you're curious. And so that allows you to just keep opening these doors. And that's what life is, going down a journey and just keep opening doors. And now you made a comment before we started the podcast, is now you're involving more coaches in your life. Can we talk about, because to me, I've got a life coach myself, but also mentors. And And to me, it's kind of the same flavor, but it's a little bit different. But the idea is having others help you get to where you need to go. So let's chat about that for a couple minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I think the real theme there was that, like, I am as dyed-in-the-wool believer in experiential ed as you can get, right? That is the best teacher, full stop, at least for me. And so the thing about mentors is that they've all had a good mentor. They've all had an experience that you haven't had, right? And so the real powerful hack there is you can glom onto their experience. The downside is that they've had that one experience, right? And nobody gets to live their life 2, 3, 4 times, right? And so really the best you can do is kind of get experience shares from those folks. And, you know, I'm in EO and entrepreneurs organization. I get a lot of those experience shares from the people that are in the various forums I've been in. And that's really valuable, right? But there's a sort of limit to it. And so when you come up against a real hard problem, right? Or you say, like, for me right now, one of the things I'm trying to think about is how to do more from a marketing perspective to create more opportunities for myself. And so I can go get a mentor, right, who's done that. But if you go get a coach, their experience is watching hundreds or thousands of people go through the exact same thing you did. And so you're not as dependent on their one experience, right? The N is a lot bigger in that example. And so I have found that to be, at this point in my life, very useful, because I'm pretty clear on what I don't want to do. And I'm also finally starting to get more clear on, like, what are my skill gaps that I need to address. And I'm not going to address it by going to more grad school or anything like that. So when you kind of have that definition, you go and you find somebody who's done the most, has the most experiences in that sort of narrow vein that you want to address. And I've found that to be super useful. And also it creates a level of accountability. Like I think somebody said to me recently that confidence is purely a function of keeping commitments to yourself. And I think coaches are really good at not holding you accountable, but giving you a reason to hold yourself accountable. Not that it's been like accountability is a huge challenge per se, but that I do believe it's true that confidence really is a function of keeping commitments to yourself.
I want to share one of the first things that my coach taught me 6 years ago. And she had a question, and it was, do you know what integrity is? And I was like, well, yeah, and we went through this booklet, and really it was about, it starts off with keeping your promises to yourself. Because a lot of times, I'm going to do this, I'll do it tomorrow. And then tomorrow happens and I'll just do it the next day. You constantly lie to yourself. And without even knowing, you just kind of permissively do this. But having true integrity says, I'm either going to commit or not say it. I'm not going to say I'm going to do it tomorrow if I'm not committed to it. But if I'm committed to it, I'm not going to lie to myself. I'm just going to do it. And that was so transformational for me. And all of my language and all of the communication that I do and being on time. If I say I'm going to be there at 9 on the dot, I'm going to make every effort to be there. And she also said, if you can't be there, things happen. As soon as you communicate that to the next person. And so having a coach is wonderful. And a point that I wanted to address that you said, you're right, people have certain experiences. And that's why in part of when I used to do wealth management, part of the thing that I saw in parents is that they had that one skill. They were good at one thing. Your parents, nurse. Some parents have that one thing, and they can give you as much information as you want to about that. But if your heart doesn't want to do that, it's not like back in the time when if you're a blacksmith and your name was Smith, and you're going to do this thing, right? And now it's like, I've got this limited amount of mentorship I can give you, and then you've got to go. And so the answer for most people is go figure it out in college. And that worked for a while. However, part of what we found over the years is college has gotten so expensive that it's become this thing that it doesn't work like it used to. So part of the reason for the show is like, look, what actually was being said is find other mentors to kind of help you figure and shape who you're going to be. But you're right, at a certain point in life, you're going to be like, I've done that and I will continue to do so, but coaching is the next next step.
Yeah. And it's not like I don't still have mentors. Right. And I talk about this with the startups that I work with all the time. I call it advisor whiplash, right? And it's that everybody lives in the ghetto of their own experience. And so if you go ask 10 people how to solve the same problem, you get 10 different answers, and you're going to have no idea what to do.
Right.
So it's, you have to sort of recognize the limitations of any, and it's true of me too, right? It's true of everybody. You have your own experiences to draw on. And so those are the ones you can share. And I think it's really dangerous when you're in that position and you're playing the role of mentor to say it like it's fact, right? Or to say it like that's the way, because it's not.
Man, I love that you said that, because in our own experience through Founding Up, we as a startup that we started a couple of years ago, go and talk to different people that I know and have had startups and everything else, and everyone's got advice. You got to do it this way, and there was not self-aware. The other thing is, one of my co-founders, a rocket scientist, big reader, I'm making a decision as CEO of the company, and he's like, "Well, that's not the way this book says." And I'm like, "There's 10,000 books that are written. We're not going to do it the way the 10,000 books are. We're going to do it our own way." Right. And so part of it is you got to look at that. And I love what you just said, which was, as a mentor, be careful to say, "Hey, this is one way to do it, but there's many ways to make this happen." I mean, that's why there's 10,000 books, and that's why there's many different ways. Is they're not wrong and how it can work, but that may not be your path. So
that's right. Yeah.
Say the confidence line one more time.
And this is, the coach it's a guy named Dan Martell. And he said that confidence is a function of keeping commitments to yourself.
Wow.
And I thought that's
so profound.
So true.
Yeah. I was just listening to Jordan Peterson talk, and he was like, there isn't a world where we don't face the consequences for things that we do or don't do. So like, if you say you're going to do something and you don't do it, you're going to face consequences, whether it's a late fee or whatever, being late or having to apologize to someone, or we're just going to face it, or we gain the confidence by doing something that we are going to do. So the rewards and the consequences that we face for doing for following through or not.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I love about experiential education, right? Is it really doesn't matter what the experience is, you're going to learn something
exactly.
from.
Exactly.
So it's one way or the other.
Well, since we are out of time, I want to make sure we put a plug in for the podcast, Navigating Complexity, that just got released.
Yeah, just first 2 episodes are out now, or wherever people listen to podcasts.
I really, really enjoyed that. You'll hear more of Matt's story there, and Matt and I get into a lot of conversations with other interesting friends that you brought on the podcast.
Very interesting people,
so I had so much fun on that podcast, so good luck with that, and hope anybody listening wants to learn more about Matt, make sure to chime in there.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Yeah, it was so fun.
Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Uncharted, Your Sidekick for Life. Huge thanks to Matt McDonnell for sharing his unfiltered story from life at sea to venture capital, and reminding us that every wild turn can become part of the adventure. If today's conversation sparked something for you, share it with a fellow explorer. Drop us a review and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. For more episodes, resources, and updates, visit foundingup.com/uncharted_podcast and check out the show notes for all the links we mentioned.